Okay, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's seminar on the use of digital payments in India. I must admit I was really excited the first time I read about the theme. I mean, this is one of the rare, if not the only instance I can recall in recent times when we have participants coming in from a research institute who've done ground level work, and they're presenting empirical evidence which has been gathered and collated for the first time. The Institute of Financial Management and Research, where both Ms. Sharon Bitho and Ms. Preeti Rao come from, is a remarkable place based in Chennai. As somebody put it earlier in the morning, they don't publicize themselves a lot. But this is the instance of an institute which lets its own research work speak for itself. And anybody in India and beyond who's worked on financial inclusion is intimately familiar with the kind of nature of work they've done. And it spans an extraordinary range, both in terms of the kind of finance function you're looking at, the themes that they're looking at. It could be microinsurance, finance for health at the bottom of the pyramid, the impact of demonetization on small households, what's going on in the informal economy. And this is all the kind of research which is critical for evidence-based policy formulation. So I do hope, I don't know to what extent the policymakers and the mandarins in Delhi pay attention, but this is an area, one of the rare institutes where they really need to take a very, very sharp look and pay close attention to what the findings say. So I have immense pleasure in introducing our colleagues. Ms. Sharon Bitho is the Executive Director and heading the along with Ms. Preeti Rao, the IFMR LEAD program. And LEAD is an acronym which is basically on evidence-based research, quite distinct and much broader than the usual randomized control trials that you hear for. It's much broader in scope because RCTs make sense only and appropriate only in certain settings where you can have a controlled sample. This is a much more extensive ground level, field level survey. And the other aspect is also, which is distinct, is usually financial sector policy is supply driven. The government designs the program and you say, okay, this is what we believe the poor need. In actuality, if you look at the studies that have been done, and there's one remarkable book called Portfolios of the Poor, which is where the researchers have actually gone and lived in the slums, and they're literally peering, not in an intrusive way, over the shoulders of a number of households, and seeing how every rupee, every cent, every dime is spent. And the findings, I think, are astonishing. It's a revelation to me, at least. I mean, I'm lost in the backwaters of Heng Mui Keng Terrace. What you find out, contrary to what you hear about the poor, that they're ill-informed, each and every household covered in that study had multiple financial relationships, or either loans you've given of a couple of hundred rupees to a neighbor at a certain interest rate for 6 months, or you've lent out and borrowed at the same time, and at the same time you found each household also had a certain amount put aside for a rainy day. And Ms. Bitho was pointing earlier that one of the setbacks that can really make a mess of any sort of financial planning is a health issue. So how do you plan for those issues? And that's the vast expansive work that goes on at IFMR. I won't take a lot of time in introducing our distinguished speakers. You have the sheets in front of you. This particular project, which Ms. Bitho is as an executive director and Ms. Rao is the associate director, is being conducted in Jaipur. And it's sort of a digital lab, and the intent is to find out how the small retailers, the kirana shops, as it were, and I'm not sure the coverage we'll hear more about that. And quite remarkably, about half the cohort is actually informal sector participants. So these are people who don't have a legal identity at all. They're the invisibles in a sense. So I'm really curious and excited about hearing what's happening with that cohort. I've spoken enough. I'll hand over the floor to Ms. Bito. We'll have about 40 minutes, okay?
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, I think we plan to talk about half an hour,
Sure.
and then
Sure.
10 minutes question. Yeah, great.
Nothing.
Thanks. That's actually very nice introduction, actually. Thank you very much for highlighting. And I think you've probably said most of the things I wanted to say. So I won't repeat. And I guess, like you mentioned, we'll let our reputation talk by themselves now.
It does.
So that's part of an example. So me and my colleague Preeti are very happy to sort of like be at this level. I've been in India, I've stayed probably 10 years, and my favorite place to be is actually on the ground, in the area, understanding what goes on, how to make a change, and what matters. The other thing that's very important actually is to bring the information up to the ground for people to, bring into debates, discussion, and bring it to the wider crowd, and in particular government and policymakers. I guess I just want to have hands on the ground so we can better adapt our presentation. Have a lot of people understood or been to India? I think most of the crowd is very in-depth. So some of the things that we'll not have to explain how things work. So feel free just to let us know, like, if anything, like, any gap in thinking of understanding. So today we present you just like a glimpse of what we've done in this huge project called, it's a digital lab, which we've created in Jaipur. And the idea is to sort of like see how we can integrate sort of like digital payments in the micro merchant ecosystem. So everyone who's aware, the government of India has taken an aggressive stance to open bank accounts, include like direct benefits transfers in bank accounts, make sure that people, try to utilize sort of like things, the digital transactions. However, the biggest piece of the puzzle is sort of like they will never transact digitally if they don't have opportunities. So if you imagine yourself in a local area in India where your government put everything in your card, in your bank account, but every route around it just transacts in cash. So that sort of like beats the purpose of sort of like integrating people digitally. So it's very important to really look into this very last mile delivery, which is an important piece of the puzzle. And there are many assumptions, and probably many people are right on every angle. So what we still need to converge towards is to having like a solution given all these perspectives. So what we've tried to do on the ground is a very learning by doing prospect where we integrated everyone in the ecosystem. We work directly with people, with startups, with private sector, with government, with academics, with practitioners. And I think we have much more than half an hour to say. So we try to slice a piece of it, but we're happy to discuss afterwards for anybody. So we can start the presentation. I just wanted to sort of like present just initially what IFMR is.
Yes.
How do we move the slides?
Oh, thanks.
Okay, great. Great. So this is just, we're talking about our ecosystem. So IFMR LEAD, we also have all these other centers that are interconnected. Some of them we created ourselves. So CDFI came out of some of the work that LEAD has done. They work a lot in government systems. We have Cray University is an upcoming university, which has started a huge liberal arts program. We also host, that falls under IFMR LEAD, Evidence for Policy Design. So the Harvard Kennedy School has integrated some of their work within India, and it falls under our ecosystem. As well, we've just started very recently a huge program, Initiative for What Works, to advance women and girls in the economy. And that relates a lot of things that are going on in India, and we talk about the digital space, how to make sure that women and girls are not left behind. Even in terms of if you put an infrastructure and all, if they do not have the ability to access the cell phone in the house, what use is it to it? So we felt that there needs to be like a very concentrated effort to understand the dynamics of household and to make sure that women and girls are not left behind. Today, tomorrow, and the very long-term future. We also host JPAL, which is known for randomized control trial. I think they have a very good marketing issue. They've started, I would say, IFMR had hosted them for over 10 years, and I would say 60% of the work and the impact that JPAL has had has been done within the IFMR ecosystem. And then today we're going to talk about Catalyst project, which was started by a huge donation from USA, wanting to look at the digital payment side. And this is where we created this Jaipur Digital Lab, as well as an incubation system with startups, which we had a lot of learnings on the ground. And we also thought that there's also going to be a continuation of it, so we'll explain later. our donors, our partner networks. So going back to IFMR LEAD, who we are, I think might not be visible. We're probably, with our whole ecosystem under LEAD, there's probably 125 people, of which we have probably about 60 to 65 who are researchers in different domains. We also have our internal data collection team, so we can actually closely monitor how our data is collected. And like the saying, garbage in, garbage out, that we thought that there's so many issues with surveys, and we have a very particular need. So we thought, let us train people how to get the best information possible, because we like to look under the hood just to make sure, and we question often. So that is some of the plus that really a lot of academics and practitioners work with us, the ability also to have that. Operational strengths, I think we love to do end-to-end, that we love to be at the ideation stage. And we love to as well be, part of it is being integrated where it matters, what means with governments, being part and giving inputs to committees. In the digital payment side, for example, when the Watal committee debated, even IFMR LEAD Catalyst gave significant amount of inputs, one being the regulatory sandbox to be created. Recently as well, the Nadal Nikani report on digital payments, we have contributed a lot to make sure that there's sufficient information on the demand side. One thing, when Sanjay Jain from iSport, who was helping to collect that, had reached out to us and to Catalyst in particular, because everywhere around India, everybody was doing supply side, like kind of like startups, government, etc. They had very little information on the demand side. And since we had collected very granular information, I think we have had a lot of input. So that motivated us to say, okay, let's discuss with people, let's promote trying to do this type of work more. So these are the thematic areas. So financial inclusion, MSME entrepreneurship, governance, and health systems, which we think are all related. We try to do research where the dots are connected and where the sum of our research adds up more. So we're able to tell a story on different pieces of it. So this starts a little bit of the work that we've done. So what's happening in India is a lot of people are very motivated by this fintech, by this innovation and things like that, which is great. However, it needs to be sort of like dosed and layered in moderation, and with a lot of, like I would say, smart operational ability and smart policy. And I think we had a great conversation with Amit Andrew to see, like, on the policy side. See, one can think on the operational startups, things like that, but there's so many things that people don't think of when things go on the ground. And actually then you start to say, oh, what do we do on that? I would even give many examples, like digital identity, giving consent, EKYC, how does that matter? How do you make sure? And even things like when you start integrating technology, people don't understand the privacy. So you see all of these micro merchants giving their PIN number to their whole family, their employees, anything like that. They don't understand that, their digital trail is dependent on them, and they might have other people that might spoil that reputation. Those things can do. Even on the regulatory side, what they cannot do, even on the data protection side, because I would say that a lot of people get into the fintech industry a lot. It's not necessarily the technology, but it's the whole roster of information and the potential to get a lot of data on people that is really appealing to them. So we need to make sure that what people do with this information, how they can use it to sell other products. I know that banks are very interested. So we sort of like came up based on our experience, how do you look at some enterprise digitization journey? It's not just to say, let's digitize it. We know it won't work because there are several, the informal economy, they'll come up and say, wait a minute, I don't want anybody to know what I'm doing. The other people will say, this is a hassle because there's an MDR rate and you have to pay. The other person would say there's no infrastructure, et cetera. So how do you combine all these things together? And you want to make sure that you advance the economy. And this is assuming that everybody's on board to say that, yes, digital can be beneficial. It can provide these things. And even that debate, there's pros and cons to this. But I think by and large, by the country, it's sort of like the way that the growth path is more promising. In terms of, especially financial inclusion, when you think of you want to get everybody on board, it's not feasible for India to have brick and mortar banks. So technology is a way to have a lot of quick wins and to have huge networks. And it's seeing as other vantage points as well. So part of the enterprise digitization journey, we figured out the first thing is understanding readiness. There is not enough work to understand, well, I have something really smart. but how does it test on the ground? We've seen so many very smart fintech people leaving their investment fund banker job and say, you know what, I have a great idea to digitize. But they fail to understand how will this work on the ground, or the ability to pilot something. I think we've said that time and time again, where people think it's just easy, the masses are there, I just have a smart solution, let's connect. So the first thing we thought is you have to understand the infrastructure, the organizational readiness. This might seem obvious, but it's not to many people. They failed to understand. The other person is the capacity to prepare the enterprise for that. So are they prepared? Are they aware? Do they understand? One thing as well we notice a lot is tryability. I think if somebody tries something and it makes their life easier, they will adopt it. That's something that we understood from the digital side. The channel of impact for digital interventions. So sometimes it's not obvious where we think. Say, when we started on our project, we thought the point of entry for small businesses was just directly the small shop. We think, oh, Paytm has bombarded and carpeted and put their system everywhere. So let's just try to convince the small merchant so we can interface with the customer, and that's our job done. What we understood is the point of influx is the supply chain. So the supply chain, so we went upward in the supply chain just to make sure that as well there's another incentive for the very tiny merchant to have digital. So we worked on different fronts. The other portion is prototyping nudging. So this is where we really understood that as researchers, we really like to have assumptions, maybe even do randomized control trials, even having really fancy econometrics and all. But for this particular point of innovation, nothing beat things like learning by doing, behavior, nudging, triability. So we have these quick feedback loop systems. We're able to quickly understand, what's going on and where are the pain points, because there are many. And after that, then it's easier to intervene to say, okay, you think this worked, not, and it's better to float right away. So those feedback mechanisms in the research are quite important. I think what we've done is almost a combination of ethnography, smart ethnography, mixed with marketing, behavioral insights, and strong analytics. I think that was an ideal combination when you want to enter this type of work. And then so the ecosystem matters as well. Understand your point, but understand the world around you. See, there's this saying that if you want to do something quick, do it by yourself. If you want to go far, do it with everybody. So you have to take the time to connect with the ecosystem, understand that. So I'll just put a couple of points. So this sort of further explains a little bit the points where, how we go about enterprise digital capacity dimensions when we want to look at it. So I'll just skip this because I want Preeti to talk a lot about the digital lab. So this is sort of a little bit about the digital system in India, that we are far, far, far behind other countries. These numbers were from last year. There's a little bit higher this year, but there are no way. 8% of digitization in India compared to China, 42% in Brazil, 50%. We are very far from reaching international numbers. So there's a lot of smart work to be done on this side. Impact of digitization. I think this showcases just a little bit about the potential impact that it can have. So it is anticipated, and this is a theory that says that if we connect a lot of our network, it can even have additional jobs, additional revenue, additional other potential. So this is the hope, and this is part of sort of our insights on the broader theory of change that we aim to bring. Those things we still are not fully understanding, because the first crux of it is understanding how do we truly digitize payments. Once only that is there, then you can potentially, start to understand and measuring the impact. But we have that in place. So there's a bit on the government side. Sorry, my eyes are a bit too for this screen here in the follow-up. So maybe it might be just easier if is my voice loud enough? Yeah, so I'm just used to watching something and walking around. Yeah. So here we have government policy. So one thing I have been discussing with Abhintan is now in India is quite appropriate, because they put all the pieces of the puzzle to have a great structure. So they put in sort of the Aadhaar system, the eKYC. They have a lot of things that are promoted. They open a lot of bank accounts for people to do. And Digital India campaign actually has done some good awareness for people. So the crux of it is how do you create more connections between this to enable a very strong infrastructure, a very strong system in place. Because by and large it's in there. Now it's making the system work that matters in a sense. Technology access, there are cheaper mobile devices, there's an increase in use of internet. Operability is one of the key things that will really push this digital payments thing. Before, the excuse was, no, I have a wallet here, I have a wallet there. But now with interoperability, the UPI systems and things like that, one thing at least is resolved, and you can bank on that to really push some areas in the system. Rapid cycle innovation, so India Stack has been wonderful. If you imagine what they've created, under 3 rupees a person, you can really assess them, with all the information they have. That's quite a big innovation, to see all the information in one place. But there's still a lot of work to do under that, how to get the information, how to secure the information. But they sort of like cracks the model of where you can get somebody's information very quickly, because understanding people's creditworthiness in small business is a huge problem in India. And the lack of capital that's infused in that system is big. So if you're able to understand and help bankers in India or NBFC or other types of lenders really have a system where they can access very quickly, I think an infusion of cash can be done quickly in that system. The scale, why we want to do that, the scale of the MSC sector is massive. It's often promoted. I think that's the way of growth in India. Again, I had a different business interest in having to do, why is that? I think probably the promotion of India has been through MSMEs. This is the system we have. And this is the one that we have to unleash, actually, because we've seen big models that really don't work. The potential is massive, but also, like Dipinder said, what do we do about these informal? Because a lot of these, it's probably even bigger, because there's a lot of tiny, small enterprises that are probably not even included in some of the work. And the employment rates are very low in India compared to us with the rest of the world, but part of the potential growth and increasing to employment in India would be probably through continuing these small businesses. But very importantly, we need to nurture these small businesses to be more in the middle. India has a lack of these middle industries actually to be able to generate huge employment. So it's not the ideal of having okay, let's create 10 tiny business. I think that it's nudging sort of some of the economy to say, let's take one business and see whether we can create 10 jobs instead. It could be a balance of both. But I think increasing the ability for firms to grow and have more businesses in the middle size in India would be key to this. So the theory of change of how we thought about it and how this links to digital payments by small merchants is that we have to drive adoption and usage. Importantly, usages, because a lot of people can say they adopt quickly, but they don't get into the habit and how to nudge that, how to make sure. And that's why your ecosystem comes in play, because you can nudge the merchant, you can nudge the consumer, you can nudge various players, you can nudge the supply chain. I don't think there is one solution fits all. It has to be a combination of things. So on top of that, why digital payments? Because they're the key. Everybody has a payment somewhere. So that's the key to get the biggest bang for the buck, because once you digitize a payment, then you can layer on alternative lending through banks. We've done a couple of pilots, for example, where people took remittance data and they analyzed it, and then banks were comfortable giving a loan to people based on their remittance history. But the initial first point was that let's have a lot of digital payments. So if you're able to build business models like that and make people, banks, comfortable using alternative data, that's the way. So the next step would be expand access to tailored finances, and after that, obviously the gold and standard would be deepen economic stability and social transformation. But those are just very long-term, of course. Okay, so this explains a bit what we've done in Jaipur. When we talk about taking an ecosystem approach, we sort of look what are the different, there's consumers, merchants, and distributors. So while we cannot do everything, so we have to be very focused on a few things. So we thought within this 2-year project, we'd focus on 10 pilots that would help tell us part of the story and how we connect it together. So I'll leave it to Preeti to explain a little bit what are these different pilots we've done on the ground. And then after that, she's going to take a deep dive on 2 or 3. But we have a lot of information on all of these projects. So after that, I can point you to the website where the information is there. And one thing we're very keen on doing is we are going to continue this project in Jaipur, but we're going to do the rural version. This is a partnership with Niti Aayog and the Atal Innovation Mission, where we're going to look how to do a same ecosystem approach, but focus on rural artisan and these informal clusters in Rajasthan, actually. Why Rajasthan? Because we already have started to understand the government. So the ecosystem is taken care of, so we're just going to layer on and put our Microsoft in a different area now. So I'll pass it on to Priti. If you have any questions for me right now, I'm happy, or after I can answer them. Priti, do you want to take the...
Sure.
It's easier when you sit here beside me.
Is it? Okay. I can see a bit, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sharon, for the wonderful introduction to the system. So like Sharon mentioned, Catalyst was a 2-year-long project which was funded by USAID and FHI 360. So we based our projects in Jaipur, like Sharon mentioned, specifically because it's a tier 2 city in India, typical of many urban cities. So any learnings from Jaipur could easily be replicated in other cities. As well, so it has a population of 3 million odd people, as well as 65,000 registered small merchants, and an equal number of small merchants in the informal sector as well. Like Dipinder mentioned, that's a very interesting sector to focus as well. So in Catalyst, we looked at projects across the supply chain because digitizing a retailer would require digitization of upward and downward, players in the supply chain. So we did projects which were digitizing B2B payments from the distributor to the retailers, as well as connections between business and consumers, digitizing the B2C payments. So some of the projects we did in the B2B section included digitizing supply chains such as FMCG, dairy, pharma, etc., through a micro ERP system called Paybe. It's a fintech solution. And then with the merchants themselves, we did pilots with eMitra, which is like a very big e-governance service center in Jaipur, very prominent and has a very deep consumer reach in Jaipur. As well as we also looked at subscription-based model with roving merchants. This was weekly payment. We brought in a fintech called Mera Paper, which decides the newspaper subscription payments between vendors as well as the households. Apart from that, we also looked at bringing in solutions through an incubator program where we brought in 5 different fintech solutions. One of them was an Aadhaar-based payment solution. The others were Paybe and Mera Paper were also our incubator partners. As well as we looked at a hyper-local system called Pay Nearby, which looked at enabling all the merchant ecosystem to cater to households. On the consumer end, we looked at digitizing the Bata-Basti slum cluster in Jaipur, which is a low-income urban slum cluster, and we partnered with Seva and FIA under this project. We also touched a little bit on the transit payment, but we did not go deep inside. The government was trying to bring in an interoperable card for transit payments in in Jaipur. We gave them initial feedback, but after that we didn't have a deep pilot. Apart from that, we also looked at KaleidoFin, which is a gold-based savings product, and looked at chit funds-based products as well, introducing them to the loan cluster. So I'll just talk about a few of them in depth, like Sharon mentioned. So, So before starting off interventions in Jaipur, we ran a market campaign to create awareness among the merchant ecosystem in Jaipur. It was like initially a 3-day campaign where we brought in these chai chowkis, like we call them, these tea stalls, showcasing different payment methods like POS, card-based payment, FT Cash, for instance, mobile wallets, UPI. UPI was a very nascent stage at the time. So we brought in awareness about UPI and what are the benefits, etc. So we targeted around 400 merchants in a small marketplace in Jaipur. The conversion rates, so 93% of them were interested, some of them were already using digital, in some form, like Paytm, for instance, had percolated in these markets. Even with the 3-day camp, there was a adoption conversion of 10%. And active usage of 20% among those 10%. Small numbers, but then only with the market campaign there was interest. So during that, there were some learnings. Basically, if the solutions had any upfront or monthly costs, people were not willing to adopt them. So this was a learning that we wanted to test in the interventions as well, try different methods to address that. As well, of course, customer preference is key for high adoption. And we also, I'm sorry, actually, you're right.
Yes.
I haven't seen much of
You have to be,
what's happening.
yeah.
Okay, so maybe I was here. Okay. Yeah, so basically we also had like a consumer handholding where people were given information about the solution, how to adopt the solution, register the solution, etc. So that created a lot of success in conversion. So this was basically a very initial camp that we did, 3-day camp. So during this camp, we realized that UPI was a much better method, like much preferred by the merchant ecosystem, primarily because UPI had its advantage, which I'll talk about later. So what we did was, following this, we did a UPI, Beam's UPI suite. Beam is the government-based UPI in India. So we did a suite for 7 to 8 months. So in the UPI suite, what we did was we went to this Barkat Nagar marketplace. And,
Priti, can you remove maybe the micro?
Oh.
Would that work? I think you have a lower voice.
Oh,
than I.
sorry.
Yeah. Maybe that's easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does
Is
it
that
work?
better?
Yeah.
Yeah. This works, right?
Yeah,
okay.
a bit more. Yeah.
Okay. So what we did was we, with different set of things, so we looked at building collaterals which explains about UPI, how to use, etc. And we put up these collaterals across the marketplace. We also had feet on street going to different merchants and consumers and hand-holding them to onboard them onto this UPI mobile application. And the other thing we did was to incentivize merchants and consumers to adopt digital payments. So there was an incentive given for a particular number of transactions that merchant or consumer completes. So what we found, basically, the outreach was around 400 merchants in that market system. Around 23% adopted UPI after the conclusion of the experiment. And out of the 23%, 33% were active users, meaning that they transacted every 2 out of 3 months. So some of the reasons for non-adoption was primarily because there was no consumer demand. The merchants would only use digital payments when the consumer demands it. Otherwise, they'll go back to cash, which is highly in use. Also, the incentive system that we had was not very attractive because we gave them a gift card kind of incentive. However, cashbacks that was given by bigger players like Paytm, etc., that was more lucrative to the merchants. Also, some of the reasons for high adoption was because UPI did not have any monthly costs. P2P was free, basically. So that was very lucrative. As far as UPI was instant bank-to-bank transfer, so whenever a consumer makes a payment, it instantly comes into the merchant's account. As well, scanning the QR code and making the payment was quite easy. And confirmation was also immediate, and the onboarding process was not too difficult. So another pilot that we ran was with the eMitra merchants in Jaipur. So eMitra is basically e-governance platform which actually covers, like, there are 5,000 eMitra centers in Jaipur itself and 52,000 in Rajasthan. So it's a very niche network where 30% of the population visit at least daily or on a weekly basis.
I think they're called CSC.
CSCs, yeah. CSCs here,
in the
it
other
could be
states,
consumer service points.
Yeah.
But they primarily provide government services. So we looked at 2 types of experiments with eMitras. So eMitra had one pain point, basically because while payments were being made by cash to them by the consumers, their payment to the government was digital. They had to maintain a prepaid wallet. So they had to make a payment immediately after the transaction is made, and they had to maintain this wallet. Sorry. Okay. So they had to maintain this wallet on an ongoing basis. So they had a working capital that has to be maintained. And they had to digitize whatever cash they get from the consumers on a daily basis. They had to visit the bank 3 to 4 times a day to digitize the cash so that they can maintain this prepaid wallet. So what we did was we did 2 different kinds of experiments. One is with the POS machine, the card-based payment method. This was a very small experiment. We gave the POS machines free of cost for 25 eMitra merchants in Barkat Nagar. And the conversions are for you to see here. So there were around 18 merchants who adopted it, and 15 actively used it during the phase of the experiment. And what we saw was there was a jump of digital transactions from 0% initially to around 8 to 9% at the end of the experiment. So some of the reasons for non-adoption or for drop-off at different stages are mentioned here as well. So there were some transaction failures when people tried to use the POS machines, and there was no grievance redressal mechanism in place for people to address this. So that was a problem. And we saw that electricity bill payments was the highest because that was more frequent bill payment. So that was the highest frequency for digital payments as well. And as the payment ticket size went up, people moved towards a digital preference for a digital payment. So lower transactions were more in cash. So these were some of the observations from the POS pilot. What we did was we concluded the POS pilot in around April 2018, and afterward we had a little bit of time to observe what was the trend. We saw that all the merchants were given free POS machines, and we also subsidized the MDR rate, the rate that government charges for POS transactions. So once these were removed, people went back to cash. So that was a very interesting observation that we had, which was very relevant for us to bring to the government as well. So the second pilot under eMitra itself was with UPI, because we realized that UPI was catching up in the Indian ecosystem in general. So under UPI, we did all that we did with the UPI sweep, particularly for the eMitra merchants. So we subsidized the transaction charges. Though UPI was free between peers to peers, there was a transaction charge because the eMitras were run by the government, so there was a 2 rupee transaction charge. So we waived this transaction charge, and we also provided incentives similar to the Beam Sweep. We provided incentives for the merchants to adopt UPI and for the consumers to pay with UPI. As well as we placed collaterals in the marketplace for people to be aware of what are the benefits of Beam, UPI, etc., and then also how to register and use them. So we targeted, the incentives were for all the 5,000 merchants, but we targeted around 200 merchants to place collaterals as well as provide targeted handholding. Our feet on street also, visited these merchants and consumers and handheld them to onboard onto UPI. So these were the different phases. We concluded the handholding, the incentive scheme in August, and then ultimately the waiver was ended in October. So that is basically the. So the transactions, you can see that once we launched the campaign, the transactions shot up by 2,000 from a minimum of 30. So there was high adoption once we launched the campaign, which included all 3 portions. But once we concluded the incentives, though there was still usage of digital payments. Like after August, there was no drop in transactions. But once we took out the transaction fee waiver, there was a complete drop. So the drop was, so it dropped back to the pre-campaign levels. So clearly from the UPI, from the eMitra pilot, we could see that cost or upfront and monthly cost or transaction fees matter to the merchant ecosystem. So
yeah, I just want to add something. It's often like the success of the PTMs and all is mostly given that they probably have huge investment and they can afford huge discounts. But I think you need to have a system where it's sustainable. I think by these pilots, we thought that, okay, let us try at least if they're able to do it. Are they able to function if they had opportunity? Now the crux is how to understand the cost issue. Who should bear the cost? And, it should not be just nudging through giving huge subsidies and all.
Right.
The private sector like Paytm have deep pockets. The government doesn't. So their BIM, for example, is struggling in despite of that. But when you take that off, everybody's equal in a sense.
right.
Let Masayoshi Son pay for the Indian consumer. That's a perfectly legitimate.
Yeah.
It's the venture capitalists. Right?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
They're the ones who
That'd
pay
be
up
wonderful
for
too.
venture.
Yeah.
Great. So the other experiment that we did was from the B2B side. We looked at 3 different supply chains. So dairy is basically governed by an apex institution called Saras Dairy in Jaipur. And then they have a set of distributor network who cater to 5 to 10 retailers each. The FMCG is governed by the brands that push their products on the supply chain, like P&G, HUL, etc. They have also around 50 to 60 distributors in Jaipur, as well as customers catering to around 50 to 100 retailers in the network. Pharma is very similar to FMCG in their outlook. So what we did in the supply chain was we brought in So in the supply chain, the brand to the distributor payment were all already digital. So the distributor had to bear the cost of digitizing the cash that he received from retailers. Down the supply chain after the distributor were all in cash. So the pain point was at the distributor level where he wanted to convert payments from retailers from cash to digital. So what we did was we brought in a ERP system solution called Paybe. It's a fintech player, a small-scale fintech player under our incubator program, who brought in this application which digitizes the invoices that is pushed by the distributor, and payments could be made immediately by the retailer through that application. So these are just some of the variations that we did across the supply chains and some of the observations. So for FMCG, we had another layer where Paybe could push a SMS link for payment by the retailer. And for pharma, we consolidated the invoices so the payment can be made in one shot. So that's one variation. So what we learned was while the onus of digitizing cash has been transferred to retailer, it still existed in the retailer point. So we tried to bring in solutions for cash digitization at the retailer end. But their low margins did not actually allow them to go for any private sector options, or we tried different models, but the margins were too low to absorb that. And we also tried incentives in the supply chain, which was basically addressed towards both the retailers for adopting the UPI-based payment, as well as for the distributor sales agents, so that he can enthuse the retailers to adopt the solution. So these are just other information. So some of the observations basically, like in dairy, we reached out to around 500 retailers. The adoption was very low. There were only 7% who adopted, mainly because of the reason stated here, like the cash digitization was a very big problem. Though we tried to bring in a lot of different systems to address that issue, that could not be addressed during our pilot period. So what we realized was ultimately if we made the consumer to retailer payment digital, that could solve the whole problem of digitizing the supply chain end to end. So we also did a lot of small pilots in the C2B space, where we brought in solutions like Aadhaar Pay, even POS-based solution, etc. So people could pay digitally at the booths, dairy booths as well, so that there could be there was no cash digitization problem across the supply chain.
A few things a few things that we discovered, like on the dairy booth. So you can digitize your cash, but who goes to the dairy booth? The housemaid. Mm-hmm. So how do you bring a card? And the other thing, the government, the dairy board was saying that people keep their coins. Because this change issue, so they keep the coins, and then the housemaid or the house person goes and gets your milk. Mm-hmm. So how do you digitize small transactions? But the dairy booth, how do you digitize him? So there is some innovations, I think, in Tamil Nadu. They have a card where anybody can use, like a couple of people, and it's a pre-authorization payment, and they go like that. But that doesn't include the coin thing. Yeah.
The loose change that.
Yeah. So we have a ton of anecdotes like that you come and you don't think of, like to see the issue, whatever technology, beautiful technology it is. What is the situation on the ground? Sorry.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so that is basically that was a major observation from the dairy, as well as some of the other experiments. So in pharma, we engaged around 1,000 pharma and FMCG. We engaged around 1,000 retailers. The adoption was much better here since the payments were weekly. So cash digitization was not that much of an issue as in dairy, which is a daily payment use case. But there were some technical issues, like infrastructural issues, that we were saying it should be solved before we bring in any kind of digital solution. So the current account, for instance, is not linked to a debit card in India. So we had to actually approach banks to, make sure that the current accounts are connected so that people can onboard themselves onto UPI, for instance. Also, people have multiple bank IDs. Only one has to be associated with the UPI application. And many of them had accounts in cooperative banks, which are not connected to UPI. So basically, the problem is there are many infrastructural or connectivity issues that has to be addressed before we bring in a solution to the market. So there were around 90% who did make digital payments at the end in FMCG. Also, we saw that there were problems with integrating ERP systems across the supply chain. So from distributor, the invoices were initially pushed through an Excel system, and then we had to integrate the system. So there was a lack of time lag between invoice and payment. So these were solved through the experiment itself. But overall, in the supply chain, the main problem that we looked at was cash digitization, which was moving from a distributor to retailer in our experiments, but we had to solve it at the retailer end. So that is basically the observation. So another experiment that we did was in the slum cluster. So we looked at Batta Basti, which is a urban slum cluster in Jaipur, with around 10,000 households, migrant population. And most of them were also home-based entrepreneurs doing like artisans, like bangle makers, etc. So all the households had one savings account at least because of the Jan Dhan program that's been running in India. However, all individuals did not have a savings account. So the intent of this project was actually to bring urban slum populations first onto a bank account and then make them actively use their bank account and ultimately digitize their transactions. So that was the three-step process. So, so what we did was we worked with organizations like FIA and SEVA. FIA is like a BC or a banking correspondent. So they put up like banking correspondent points, customer service points, like you mentioned, in different areas in Batta Basti to enable people to open their bank accounts and actively transact in bank accounts. SEVA was actually a local community mobilizer, so they had this reach in Batta Basti. Batta Basti was a very difficult, terrain to enter into, mainly because it was a highly Muslim population, and then there were a lot of internal dynamics going on. So we had to work with SEVA to actually bring in learnings into the households in Batta Basti. So we worked with both of them. So the first leg of the digitization process was to open accounts itself. So the target was to open around 2,000 accounts and then have a digital conversion to 800 of them, in 800 of them. However, we will talk a little bit about what were the issues. So there was a steep drop-off in many of these points. So the conversion from the initial opening bank account to active usage did not happen at all due to many of the reasons. Initially because most of the people in the household did not have phone numbers at all to reach them. So they could not even authenticate their UPI or any other payment modes, or they could not be onboarded to KYC. So this was not available. And people who opened their bank accounts did not also get their ATM cards. So the ATM cards would come to the BC center, but people were not going to collect their ATM cards. Only if they have their ATM cards could they enable themselves onto any digital platform. And the third step was also to generate PINs, which again the infrastructure for that was not enabled. People had to go to an ATM to generate their PIN. So we had to do a lot of handholding in each of these.
Just that PIN. This PIN issue is a huge thing. You would not link it to digitization, but you need to have an operational bank account. So the BC is able to do everything except give you the PIN number to access your bank account. So to access your bank account, you need to reach an ATM, which beats the point of the BC.
Right, exactly.
Or you need to go to the bank branch, which also beats the point. So that's a regulatory side where we thought, can you not ease that? So if you want to digitize, the first thing is make sure people have access to a functioning bank account. And those are the types of things that we brought about, that the number of people who cannot access or not operationalize their PIN is huge.
Right.
So sometimes it's just that push or that enabler or that solution can push a segment that's
right. So though we brought in a lot of digital payment points, like in the utility bill payment, etc., in the savings as well, digital savings, the problem was, like Sharon mentioned, that the first step could not be completed because of all the issues that were prevalent in the banking systems in India already. So finally, we also tried digital savings with the Kaleidofin. I think Vipul mentioned about Kaleidofin as well. So they had this goal-based saving scheme. So we thought we will use that saving scheme to encourage savings into the bank accounts of which were opened in the urban slum cluster. We only 3% of the population who opened the accounts saved in these schemes because there was no savings habit. So we had to create a lot of awareness programs to inculcate the savings habit, as well as the CSP point did not have a cash digitization point. So these were some of the overall observations that we had from the urban slum cluster project as well. Yeah, so Chad, you want to take this?
Yeah. So this is just sort of like a very tip of the iceberg, and we wanted to give you just some key, very maybe descriptive numbers. Some of the results we have would say it's not surprising. It's low, but we wanted to have exact figures doing it. Okay, this is our starting point. This is our baseline. If somebody brings out something, the awareness, it'll be 10%. Out of those 10%, it'll drop to like maybe 5% would actually use it. So then the ideal is to understand the whole funnel and where are the pain points? Where do you nudge? Where do you push? Like a water balloon, kind of like thing. You push here, it'll interact somewhere else. Or where is everybody stuck? Because you think of a funnel, there might be something that needs to be unclogged, whether it's like local, whether it's, a lot of it actually has to do with regulations. So what we've done when we looked at this project, the MeitY, the Ministry of Technology, the joint sector is very interested in understanding, meeting us quarterly. Where are people stuck? Not that he does something right now, but as they shape policy, they wanted to understand, like, they called us once, said, who is using my BIM and who is not using it? Tell us why. So we actually have a learning notes on BIM and things like that. So this process, I think, allows us to shape, and this is our thought process maybe a year and a half ago. We've evolved a lot, and we're conceptualizing our next thing on the ground in the rural area, where we'll also have this three-prong approach where it'll be a very learning by doing, a huge research and huge regulatory, all at the same time that we do. So knowledge exchange with other countries, this is why we're here today. I think we got in touch with Amitandu to see how can we collaborate, because we love to understand what we do on the ground and bring it up and to say, what do you think? I think that's how you bring like good ideas and solution. And first, experimentation. We also think that some people, we've used a couple of incubators that just started, but we noticed that there's a requirement a bit for an accelerator as well, that a lot of people are a little bit more advanced in their business model, but they're stuck for a couple of reasons. So how can you also look at a little bit experimentation with graduation models? So I'll stop it here. I hope you enjoyed. This was not a pure academic thing. We thought we'd come with our numbers first and get some ideas. So any question?
Thank you. That's an extraordinary scope of coverage that you have in this. It's absolutely staggering, and I'm not risking getting into any hyperbole out here. And the partners that you have with Seva and others to mediate what is this. I've just had a couple of very quick questions for you, Shay. When you mention startups, are these in-house establishments?
No. What we've done is we had like a campaign.
Right.
So we had Seva, Kalidifin being one. So we promoted it through VS. And we particularly specialize in fintech for last mile delivery.
Right,
So
yeah,
we had an India campaign, and we selected, I think we got like 60, and we selected 5 for different reasons. Some were more testing models, like the Aadhaar Pay with the finger. Those were very interesting as well, because one could think with the finger it's easy, but most of the low-income people are manual laborers and they have no more fingerprint.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? So those type of things we even brought to the regulatory side, and so these guys were able to fine-tune their models. So it was and our next phase as well, we will be reaching out to across India to see what are the innovations to help in the rural sector. Anybody who has a startup.
The fingerprint issues left people even deprived of their rations, which
yeah,
is,
right. I would imagine.
That's had devastating consequences for a lot of folks as well. A couple of quick questions, if I may. I mean, some of the results that you spoke of, these are expected. Like in the pharma sector, you'd expect a much higher, and like you're talking about electricity bills, is a much higher take-up rate. Mm-hmm. So these conform to your priors, right?
Right. Some of
and what you would expect from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. What are the surprises that emerged in it?
Surprise is basically like we mentioned during the Slum Cluster project. Right. We did not imagine that converting people to use their bank accounts actively would be such a great hurdle. So the last mile, points for making people transact digitally was not available, like Sharon mentioned. Like they had to still go to the ATM to generate a PIN number, which is not something that we would have thought about.
That's even for the middle class, it becomes a complicated issue of having to go there. But this is something, again, that you find again and again. There's a reversion. I mean, during demonetization, the aftermath, it was forced down everybody's throat. But subsequently, even the aggregate data shows there's been a reversion.
Yeah.
So the next question is, if
Just
if
add,
I'm a
I
di-
think
yeah, sorry.
the surprise would be that even though you know numbers, the different reasons are massive. So it's not a one size fits all. So understanding, so one can understand that, okay, we do it, maybe 10% conversion. That number we confirm and we try it ourselves. When you go back and understand the funnel, why did you stop at this? You know, every step, why do you stop? The reasons are vast. So that's why it confirms that you really need an ecosystem. And in the micro merchant, it's not transferring one, it's transferring the whole ecosystem together. Because everybody's watching like who will move first. Kind of like, if they move, I'll move, kind of like thing. So it's bringing everybody on board. That's the crux of it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so if there's and there are a lot of digital evangelists and digital gurus in the government who want to see this succeed and outside as well. These results are a bit disquieting. It's sort of a mixed bag of results. You'd agree with that?
Yeah.
But the main issue is about take-up amongst the retail consumer. There's still a deep-rooted reluctance to
Very
deal with
hard.
an animal.
Very much.
And if I'm on the margin, unless they're very tangible and clear benefits and ease of use, and I'm absolutely convinced others around me, I'd be very hesitant to go into that, right?
Absolutely.
And that's a major hurdle. I mean, do you see any
Right.
evidence or any insights that would help to tide over that?
My sense is first, well, everybody knows cash is king. In the micro merchant, customer is king, unless there's a huge demand. And one tends to think, people have this very economist view that as soon as you have, you know, everybody does those equivalent models and 1 rupee, you shift to the other, like theoretically. To change, it has to be a huge benefit, not just a little bit more. It has to be a big incentive that will shift the needle. So that means that when you design policies, it has to be so advantageous on many sides. It has to be on dual side. You have to function on the consumer side, and I think they've started that. Like when I talk about the system is there, having money in the bank account digitally, that starts. That's just the beginning. It's sort of like a journey that you have to push people together. And on the merchant side, actually, offering. And some of the things we've not shown some things, but people always think that people don't want to go digital because of GST. We have actually tested that. It's not true. So we actually did a sort of like a walk with a couple of people to look on the GST perspective. Nothing is black and white what we thought of this. So you really have to take a smart strategy, and solutions have to combine together. I think that's why, again, I'll stress the ecosystem point, because the Ministry of Finance cannot function without the Ministry of IT, nor can they function without the Ministry of Rural Development, MRD, actually. So our goal is to sort of like bring these regulators on the same platform to align, I think. That's a huge task, but that's maybe with you and Hamilton we can...
I mean, given the silos that exist.
It has to, you have to break, that's what we understood, especially the funnel analysis really showcase that.
Also, convenience to the consumer is very key.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
some
That's what I'm
experiments.
going to look at eventually.
Yes. We've not explained one of the experiments here, but the subscription-based model experiment actually brought that out very well, because people had to pay for newspapers, and the newspaper vendor would come to their house, and they will not be available. So this is a remote payment, which was very easy for them to. Yes. So convenience was key.
That's critical, and that's what underlies the success of M-Pesa.
Absolutely.
I mean, in a sense. Just to open up to the floor. Yes, John.
So I thought it was interesting, this dichotomy between the supply and the demand, and how you're kind of looking at what's happening on the ground. And I'm curious because from afar it seems like the Modi government is kind of pushing digital solutions for things like the agrarian crisis or creating e-markets. And even when I was in Delhi, I was shocked and marveled at the number of teams who were coming up with all of these innovative app solutions to fix problems. But I very rarely hear about the ethnographic side of things, like going into rural areas and figuring out, what are the needs, what are the communities, what are the demands. And I'm curious how many groups in India are doing something similar to what you're doing, how many ethnographies are going on to figure out, this interface between the digital side and the rural side.
I would say very few, actually. And I think that's one thing because people actually very work into interfaces. Some people, like you mentioned, they're on the banking side, on the community side. Very few organizations are like aggregators. So I don't want to toot our own horn, but IFMR LEAD has always been sort of like a collaborative system where we work with very partners, like in an objective way. So I think that helped a bit of us giving. So these numbers might seem smaller or something like that. We have a lot of evidence, but when we talk to people on this digital payment committee we're doing, the reason why they reached out to us is they had no information on the demand side. The reason why is it's extremely difficult to do. It's very tedious and it's a bit expensive. But my sense is it's not easy, but it's worth it. Because only then you'll understand, because the scenario now in India is sort of like a Jason Pollock of applications and innovation. People are like, woohoo, digital is all gung-ho. It'll not solve everything. There's a lot of things. The journey is long, but it's worth it. But provided there's like a pathway that's clear to everybody. I think alignment is key. I think a good dose of reality as well. I think I'll not put comments on the government of India now. They're very good at slogans, but put your money where your mouth is, in a sense that I think you have to actually know that some things take longer and make sure that everybody's aligned in the system. The community is there with you. I think the only way the digital will work is bringing the masses to it, and that's not happening actually to see. And we have many, the website for this project is cashlesscatalyst.org. If you look, what we've done is we've done a lot of field stories. We've done a lot of learning notes on top of our pilots, because we thought there's a tremendous learning journey. Even, for example, in the Bata Basti thing for women, we noticed that it's not easy to get women on board because of household dynamics. So we did campaigns. So we did digital melas for both men and women. You can't just target women because the men will come back and say, why don't you invite me? So we did both. But my field resident, she was staying a lot in the slum area, and she noticed groups of women by themselves learning WhatsApp. So we sort of did case studies on that. We also understood, for example, how can you diffuse technology among women? So although a lot of the husbands have a lot of say, the key for women to learn technology is their kids, actually. So, and the probability of a woman being more knowledgeable about payment systems if they have a teenage son in the household. Probably also a daughter through YouTube and things like that. So it's not necessarily the community and the self-help group system. So then you understand who are the change agents, is the youth per se. The husband has a say on sort of the agency of the household, whether women or not, but even when the husband is more liberal and things like that, if he's not in tune to what's going on, it's all of these young ones so then you change your philosophy. You sort of figure out how to do a better campaign. The other crux, I'm very convinced of this, and we're going to try to do experiments on that, is to train. There are very well-known local community aggregators that have been very good to transfuse information about helping women's agency, helping women health and nutrition. Seva is one example, which is a very well-known one. But in terms of understanding how to adapt technology, they need help, actually. They need to have their digital financial capabilities done, and we are probably going to try some projects to see what matters, how to help them at a low-cost kind of thing. Because you have to understand their value, because we try to bring in people who are pretty top-notch, and they're just no, we know what you're doing. So it is sort of blending those different worlds, I think. It will happen, but I think we have to figure out the pathway to make it stick, kind of thing. So the truth is, I don't think there are many who would have the patience to do it, but that's our USP. I think there's a couple of other organizations, and there's a couple of Niti Aayog initiatives, there's aspirational villages, I think there's some digital village. But what they're doing is that they say, okay, I don't want 1 or 2, I want to do 75, I want to do 100. Our USP is really understand, deep dive through Microsoft, what is the issue, and then after that put things on fire. So we sometimes work in parallel to these people. We're trying to work on a project similar to what we've done to look at tribals. So tribals is a very excluded segment in India. But now the government has put a lot of initiative in place to help unleash that area. But they're riddled with a lot of complex things, and a lot of people have tried to do even small things in that area. But there's a very motivated person from TriFed, and they put together a consortium of people to look at the problem. But they also are implementing everything across the country at once. But we're motivated to say, no, we want to first take a deep dive in actually looking at all the segments, a very deep ethnographic research from finding forest dwellers who collect, who buys the thing, how do they function, and when you talk about village, you need to understand how does your family compared to others, how do these technologies in a village, how does that disrupt the community sense? So you have to function slowly. Else, if one person or two-person influential in an area, the Grand Panchayat doesn't understand, nothing sticks. So it's a slow process, but I think it's one that's not linear. Once you figure out the magic formula, then it goes very quickly, actually.
And whether it translates into other settings.
Yes, exactly. If you want to come to India, you're happy to visit us. We're going to, if you go to Delhi, Rajasthan, Jaipur is not too far. So we're just going to start an incubator for rural Rajasthan very soon. Yeah.
I think the point you raise is a critically important one, and that's a desperate need for anthropologists to talk to economists or the other way around.
Yes,
and that's where the huge gaps, be it gender, class, stratification of any order, and that's
the informal
where the
economy.
Policymakers are so blinded, and said blinded in a sense. And I think you were being very modest when you said there may be a handful of other institutions in the country that are doing that. I'm not really sure if there's any at all, actually, in that space. Please, with it.
So can you give a couple of examples of things that people, these marginalized groups, can do with digital payments, which they are not able to do with cash? A compelling case for why they should, what they can, how they can improve their opportunities, or sort of things that they can do. I didn't get a sense of that from your presentation.
Yeah. Priti, you want to start? I can give a few examples. So first, they need to be aware of the potential of technology, and they're not going to be convinced right away. So you need to show use cases. For example, if you showcase that, say, a mother has to pay school fees. So often they have to take, even my staff, actually, my admin staff, they have to take one day off to do the queue at the school. So you have to showcase very powerful use cases for someone to try. Because the crux of what we showed is, yes, that number, 10% are very low, but once people adopt it, we have a couple examples. Once people adopt it, the usage is big. They'll always adopt it. So now it's a numbers game. So if you have to figure out the entry point. So for women, the entry point should be like things that will help her save time, not lose 1 day of work. So if you can show by UPI that you can pay your school fees, you don't have to do a queue, that's something that would be a powerful incentive. For women, I would say that since they're not head of the finance per se, they do like daily financing, things like that. You have to showcase like the wide range of things they can do. So we're doing a couple of experiments. These are digital use cases in self-help groups. This is with iWage, actually one of our initiatives in gender, and they're trying to integrate sort of like more the government schemes. So within self-help groups, if you understand that your phone, by digital, you can access schemes very easily that are appropriate, you can register very easily, then lead by example, no? So we want to target a few women that understand technology better, and after that, then they'll promote it to others. So you have to find the right aggregator and the right person who understands it, and then showcases to others. One of the examples in the WhatsApp group, the WhatsApp group in Batabasi, where women were teaching each other WhatsApp. So my colleague actually joined that group, and the women themselves, they discovered the power of coupons. So they found out all these coupons and exchanging recipes and things like that. One of the key, the point of entry for digital for women would be as well these YouTubes. So people have started looking at television series, actually. They look a lot of things on YouTube, but there's not enough things on YouTube in vernacular language. So if you increase their learning through that, they'll be more than happy to.
So these are all exactly the same things that people in the middle class will also be pulled in by, right? There's nothing different in character.
I wouldn't say there's nothing different in character. I think
other than the benefits part of it, probably.
Yeah. I think if you showcase that, I think the adoption is more complicated because what you learned from Portfolios of the Poor and other books that came out, like there's one, Scarcity, to show that the poor level of risk is much higher. So they tend to they have less room to experiment than middle income people. So while the benefits will be the same, the opportunity for them to change is harder, actually. And they have much more distress in their lives, because middle income people actually they have smoothing income, they're willing to experiment, they have time, they're a little bit less risk averse. But if you're very poor, and your income is not stable, layering on digital, even if it's the same benefit as somebody else, is not obvious per se. So, and you talk about rural, you'll tap into agriculture people, and their income depends on their cycle of production. Like the sugarcane, there was an experiment in Tamil Nadu for sugarcane farmers where the cycle is very long. It's like 10 to 11 months. And they showcased that 1 month before the sugarcane cycle finishes and people actually get their money, the IQ level of a farmer drops 16 points. So their ability to make decisions, to want to even get onto technology is really tampered. No, that's huge. So we have to figure out, yes, the benefits are the same, but the risks are very different between the poor and the middle income. So if we factor that in and we make them do much more baby steps, I think like that, so it doesn't bother their daily lifestyle.
Yeah. Just to add, we also found that role modeling was very prominent in that ecosystem, in that particular segment. Basically, if you show that there is an early adopter and they could voice their experience, that caught up with most of their peer groups. So this is something that was a method that we used in Bhattavasti, particularly to bring women onto digital payment methods.
Okay. So just one follow-up.
That should powerful.
So you were talking about portfolios of the poor, that people are financially connected and they go to each other to borrow and lend very small amounts. So if you have apps which say, I suddenly need 100 rupees or 500 rupees to do something, and I can quickly go and borrow from my brother-in-law or from my friend in the next village and so on. I don't know if these sort of things will quickly get that 500 rupees, do something and pay it back. Are there things like that you can do?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example, and that example was given by exactly Susharita, who is mentioning. So part of the reason why she sort of like started Kaladiffin as well is she tells this story, and I've seen this many times in area, like a woman again for school fees. So there's one woman 27 times in the year that she pawned her gold bangle. That means that, first, it's a waste of time. Second, there's not a financial product that's useful for her. She might have pawned it 1,000 rupees at a time, but she pawned it 27 times in the year. That is huge, no? So I think you need to understand sort of like how to make something that's convenient within the way they work, within the way, and try to showcase them. And it's only, see, if you're very poor, you're very short-term, you're very myopic. If you bring to the fact that 1 year later you went 27 times to the pawn shop and you try to make them understand, there is a way. People are very clever, else they'll all die, no? So they're sustainable, they have their own way of sustaining, but you have to slowly bring into something that's smart. You see the same thing with the famous example is always the vegetable vendors, the Tatkat system, where people borrow 1,000 rupees in the morning and they give 1,109. 10% per day. Which banker would not love that market? However, people try, nobody gets into that because it's so convenient. And on top of that, they say, okay, keep your Tadkal system, but instead of just take 1 tea less a day, 5 rupees, put it in your pocket, put it aside, save it. Explain to them compounded interest and things like that. It's very hard to nudge, actually. We've done there's a couple of professors actually as well that did campaign and things like that. So they don't think that. They think very differently than us. So it has to be a solution that they show very quick results that they would latch on to, no? Because they're still, they don't realize the amount of money they're leaving on the table. They don't have the ability to plan. So if you look at I love Sandra's book on scarcity because it explains exactly the packing problem where you have you take too much risk and things like that, and they're very risk averse. The other thing about portfolios of the poor is one thing that was very shocking, even I remember Jonathan Merkin doing the presentation in one of the conferences, that to get to their numbers, it's not one survey. They went 6 times to the household. That means after one of survey, that also means that they also are not aware of their own. They don't do their financial web. They don't do planning like we do. They don't understand where all their pockets are. It's someone that had to go, say, wait a minute, what is your money? Come back, your income and expenses don't match. Go again. Okay, you have too much money here and not enough here. And then they figure out, I have money there, money there. They're probably not even aware. So the first step is making them aware so they can plan better as well. So those are all types of hurdles that I think that overcome that middle class probably don't have. Yeah.
Yes, please. I mean, just a quick point on the middle class also. If you look at the take-up rate is for higher value items as well, and the
Yes.
level of risk aversion, of course. I mean, it's not a liquid market, so you can't just send a WhatsApp. There isn't that volume of discretionary funds. I mean, 500. If you see the actual numbers, it's a huge amount relative to the transactions that have been documented in that book as well. Yes, please.
Yes. First of all, a very good presentation. I got a lot of insights about the MSME and SME sector in India and what are the challenges they are facing. I have two questions. One is about the B2B transactions. So using e-wallets, when we talk about a transaction between two businesses for interchange, how popular is it in India, or is it at what stage is it in, and what do you think would be the future of those transactions between companies? When I say companies, it's more about the SMEs in the area. And second question is, what are the major e-wallets currently in place, and what are the factors which the merchants and consumers take into account to decide that I want to use this wallet?
Vijay, you want to take
Yeah,
it?
so e-wallets basically are not interoperable. So the major thing that why we didn't use e-wallet specifically in our experiments itself as a mode of digital payment to promote was because it's not interoperable. So if you have an account in ICICI Bank and somebody has an IDBI Bank, they cannot transfer funds. So everybody has to download the wallet and put in funds, load funds basically to the wallet and then transact. So there is a 3-step process in e-wallets. So UPI actually, does away with all these. It's basically you have your bank account, somebody else has some other bank account, you can directly transact with them without having any wallet to onboard. In India, to your second question, the primary wallets are Paytm is a very big, is very prominent. There is MobiKwik, Freecharge, and different kind of smaller players as well.
So for B2B transactions, even in wallets, there is no interoperability. Is it like if I'm having a...
So they will have to actually download the wallet and upload funds into it. So before
Correct.
UPI came into the picture, e-wallets was big because that was the only option that was available. But
Right.
once UPI with interoperability had come into the market, e-wallets usage has gone down a lot.
I think if you know, UPI went really big. Actually, I think UPI has more transactions than
Wallets, of course.
wallets. Yeah, wallets are probably going to go away.
Right,
but
yeah.
And okay, if we take UPI into account, is there a common trend for transactions between two companies? Like if they have to pay, let's say a small vegetable vendor has to pay money to his food supplier. Does it happen digitally? Is it coming up, or
Peer-to-peer transfer has been used very much under UPI because it's free, like I mentioned. Peer to merchants is not that much because there's a cost associated with that. Peer-to-peer is free and people are using it in different sections of the society.
Okay.
So it was being done in some subsidy mandis, as they say in the
Right, exactly.
This is one of the earliest converters.
Experiments
yeah.
that was done.
I think we are running out of time. We are out of time, in fact. Would you please join me in thanking our speakers? This has been absolutely brilliant, and it's raised a huge number of questions. We're really privileged.
Okay.
We're really privileged to have you here, and thank you
you.
very much for joining us.
Thank you.